Kalen stood amidst the wreckage of the reactor bay, blood dripping from his knuckles onto the floor, as he looked into the security camera with eyes that had forgotten how to be human. He was a red ghost in a room of scrap metal, his breathing so shallow it didn't even stir the smoke. The last Vorak assassin lay in a heap at his feet, its chitinous armor shattered like glass. Have you ever wondered if the people you trust the most are the ones you should fear? Subscribe to peel back the layers of the galaxy's deepest deceptions. 6 months earlier, a silver-leafed pressed flower had arrived in a glass casing, the only dowry Kalen Thorne brought to the Zenith capital. Archon Alara watched from her balcony as the Orion shuttle descended into the spires of Aethelgard. The Zeniths were beings of light and longevity, their skin shimmering with the soft glow of 1,000 years of biological refinement. To her, the Orions were a tragedy of biology, short-lived, fragile, and utterly unremarkable. When Kalen stepped onto the docking pad, he looked less like a husband and more like a lost servant. He was soft-spoken, his clothes were made of coarse fibers, and he kept his gaze averted from the blinding radiance of the Zenith lords. The court was not kind. During the welcoming rite, the prime hegemon sat Kalen at the foot of the banquet table, offering him wine that was too potent for Orion physiology. Alara watched him struggle with the heavy crystalline chalice, his hands trembling slightly. The Orions measure time in heartbeats, the hegemon mocked, his voice echoing through the vaulted hall. Let us hope his heart does not give out before the first dance. Kalen simply smiled, a small, polite thing that didn't reach his eyes. He reached into his pocket and pulled out that same silver-leafed flower, turning it over in his calloused fingers. It was a gesture of such profound simplicity that Alara felt a pang of genuine pity. She had married a diplomat, a man meant to be a bridge between their worlds, but she feared she had actually married a lamb sent to a den of lions. Peace is often a fragile illusion maintained by those who know exactly how much blood it takes to keep the floor clean. One night, unable to sleep under the weight of her political obligations, Alara wandered into the lower training gardens. She expected to find the usual automated drones or perhaps a wayward guard. Instead, she found Kalen. Beneath the observation deck, something shifted. He wasn't the clumsy man from the banquet. He moved through the shadows with a terrifying fluidity, his body a blur of motion that defied Zenith physics. There was no sound, only the displacement of air. When he stopped, his back was to her, and the moonlight caught the deep, jagged ridges of scars that spanned his shoulders, marks that weren't made by any standard weapon. They looked like the history of a war the galaxy had never recorded. "Archon," he said without turning, his voice dropping the soft lilt he used in public. "It's a beautiful night for a stroll." Alara stepped into the light, her heart hammering against her ribs. She had assumed a lack of outward power equated to a lack of capability, a strategic error that felt heavier with every step she took toward him. "What are you?" she whispered. Kalen turned, the silver-leafed flower tucked into his belt. "We played the victim for a century so the galaxy wouldn't realize we were the apex predators. We had to. If they knew what we were built for, they wouldn't let us exist." But the secret Kalen carried was not merely a matter of tactical advantage. It was a biological imperative. The Orions had not evolved. They had been edited. Their shorter lifespans were a byproduct of a metabolism that burned 10 times hotter than any other sentient species, a sacrifice of duration for the sake of absolute, unmitigated intensity. Archon Alara watched the diplomatic summit at the Meridian hub dissolve into a scream of tearing metal. The Vorak swarm did not declare war. They arrived as a harvesting tide. Their shock troops, hulking masses of jagged chitin and bioacid, tore through the Zenith honor guard like parchment. Amidst the chaos, Alara looked for Kalen, but his seat was empty. He had vanished the moment the first hull breach echoed through the station. In the security spire, she bypassed the hegemon's lockouts. The feeds showed a nightmare. A shadow moved through the maintenance vents. It wasn't running, it was hunting. Kalen dropped from a ceiling grate, directly into the center of a Vorak demolition squad. He didn't use a pulse rifle or a blade. He used himself. With a speed that rendered the camera's frame rate useless, he dismantled the invaders. He moved with a terrifying superhuman efficiency, snapping reinforced carapaces with his bare hands and redirecting the force of their own strikes against them. She thought she had married a diplomat. She realized she had invited a god of ruin into her bedchambers. The Zenith nobles cowered in the inner sanctum, listening to the muffled thuds of a massacre they couldn't see. They spoke of the fragile Orion, who had surely been the first to die. Alara remained silent, her eyes fixed on the final feed in the reactor core. Kalen stood alone against the remaining swarm leaders. He was a whirlwind of gore and motion, a living weapon that had finally been unsheathed. By the time the station's emergency lights flickered back to a steady blue, the Vorak were gone. Or rather, they were part of the scenery. Kalen walked back into the High Council chamber. The surviving Zenith lords recoiled, their luminous skin dimming in the presence of something so viscerally violent. Kalen's formal tunic was shredded, his knuckles raw, and his face splattered with the dark, acrid ichor of the swarm. But as he approached Alara, the tension in his frame evaporated. The monster receded, replaced by the quiet, unassuming man she had first met on the docking pad. "Are you hurt?" he asked. His voice was steady, gentle, and utterly terrifying to everyone else in the room. He reached into his belt and pulled out a small, crushed object. It was a silver-leafed flower similar to his dowry, but the petals were stained a deep, bruised crimson. He pressed it into her hand. True strength is not the ability to kill, but the will to remain gentle after the killing is done. The hegemon tried to speak, to demand an explanation for the Orion League's hidden military prowess, but the words died in his throat. The hierarchy of the galaxy had been inverted in a single hour. The Zeniths would live for centuries, but they would do so under the quiet protection of a species that measured its life in heartbeats that could turn into a war drum at any moment. Alara looked at the crushed bloom, then up at the man who chose kindness despite the carnage he was built for. She didn't see a pawn anymore. She saw the Guardian, now that the mask has fallen. Do you believe a weapon can ever truly choose to be a person? We'll be here tomorrow to explore the next secret in the stars.